everyone, welcome back to Ninja the Viaduct, where we talk about games, movies, and all things entertainment with a bit of intelligence that we hope you all will get some thought-provoking commentary on all these things you love and enjoy. Recently, a new presentation deck titled The State of Video Gaming in 2025 was created and released by Matthew Ball, the CEO of Epyllion. This report covers a wide range of aspects on where the video game industry is now, how it got here, its growth, and future. We talk about the insights on how the industry reached its high point in the past 3 years and the challenges it faces in this environment of decline. Let's dive in. So for this week, I was going through articles and I found one that was pretty interesting from a guy named Matthew Ball. He's involved with television, films, and video games. And just a couple of days ago, apparently his presentation called The State of Gaming was published. He breaks down a lot of the video game industry in different groups. So anywhere from things like, how the video game industry has grown in the past, 5 years, and how it's kind of slowly stagnated. It was kind of interesting to see how he pieced together the game industry in the past 5 years. So a lot of us know that in that time frame, right? We do generally know that gaming just blew up, right? Because a lot of people are home, people are on their devices, and because people are home, everyone was just trying to figure out a way to, what to do with my time, right? And he makes the connection that around the whole pandemic time frame, gaming just blew up way more than it deserves to be. And what he was saying that, so if you compare it to 2011 to 2021, right, just around pandemic time, gaming as an industry grew, pretty consistent, nothing really crazy, nothing too spiky. But the moment the pandemic hit, right, it just blew up to like a $20 billion industry. During the past 3 years, the gaming industry increased its growth rate by like 108%. So, when you take that idea and you compare it to the global economy, it just grows way more than the typical economy. Like, for example, he makes the case here that, the US real gross domestic product grew by 52%. Or take another country like Japan, it grew, it actually decreased by negative 19%. But then overall world GDP grew by 32%. But then when you look at the gaming industry as a whole, it grew by 108%, right? At one point from 2011, it was $111 billion industry. And then it grew to like a $231 billion industry by 2021. So, you would think that's a pretty good thing, right? For all of us that like games, right? And, more games, that sounds good. More development, that's cool. But, he starts to allude to the whole idea that growth just couldn't be sustained for a variety of reasons. You could argue that some of the games that were being made in the past few years, like Cyberpunk, Spider-Man 2, Hogwarts, Alan Wake. So there's a bunch of games that came out, right? And you would think that all those games would provide the same amount of growth going on. But actually, it didn't. It actually pulled back. And then that kind of brings up the question, like why would that be the case? Because, gaming industry in the past few years has been going on a downward trajectory. But other mediums, such as books, music, video, social media content, for example, has just been continued to grow and get bigger. He explains that a lot of the trend has been one, people have been spending less. Actually, people overall have been playing less games. And people are generally less engaged with video gaming in general. I suppose if I were to think about that kind of does make sense, because during pandemic, right, I'm sure there are a lot of gamers who actually were not probably consistent gamers before pandemic. It's just that, when pandemic hit, people started playing more games. I suspect mobile was probably a big factor, or maybe people on their casual gamers on their Nintendo Switch were probably or the casual gamer space was probably a big reason for that boost in video gamers growing and during that time frame. But now that, pandemic has just, for the most part, been passed and done, a lot of those people are just no longer coming back for that gaming experience. So, he So because of that, that would kind of explain why a lot of these games we've been seeing a lot of layouts have been happening in the past few years, past couple of years. So you had like a lot of games being canceled. Some headlines I can recall, right? So Naughty Dog canceled its like Last of Us multiplayer game. Bungie canceled a project within the Disney universe. Ubisoft cancels the Division game that they were making, and a bunch of other games being canceled, right? Just because the fact that a lot of these companies were starting to realize that they were starting projects that the player base wasn't there for. But it's really interesting to kind of see those numbers come up that the game industry has declined in such a huge way. Maybe not so much because of the quality of games, because you argue a lot of the games that have been coming out in the past couple of years have been pretty good. Maybe not the game for everyone, but definitely hard to say that they were badly crafted games. There were a handful of famous ones that we know probably didn't pan out too well. It does validate some of the things I was thinking of.
I think a huge factor in all of this too is that one, endless growth is an unsustainable model overall. But just with the overall costs for the development of these games too, right? It's ballooned in such a way that even if by all accounts a game can sell well compared to previous numbers, just the cost of development is so staggering that you would need to double, even triple those numbers, right? And I think with that too, competition is so incredibly fierce now with things like these live service games, mobile games. Now they're able to bring people in, casual gamers as well, long-term gamers, and they sort of just lock people in there. There's no time to try anything else unless it's like a massive hit and everyone's going to talk about it, right? Things like Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring, right? These are staples that made a name for itself, won the Game Awards, and then everyone flocked to it. But it's hard to really take a chance on a game because one, they're expensive. We're in somewhat of a economic downturn across the board for everybody, and so people want to be careful with how they spend their dollar. And why take the chance when you can just reinvest that in something is already tried and true, something that you enjoy, whether that's Apex, Fortnite, Call of Duty, things of like that. So
when you think about it, you could say that a lot of things have been happening with the game industry. Game industry has been propped up by a feedback loop of sorts, because you have mobile coming in, right? Obviously, mobile blew up, especially in the casual space. But they also had mobile, but then you also had other platforms kind of propping up the whole industry, right? So you have things like free to play. So you bring down the whole barrier to entry to play games, right? And then people get kind of accustomed to playing games for quote unquote free, right? Although it's really not free when you start including things like battle passes and all this other stuff, right? But you have like live service games. You have games that are like social gamings. Like I think one of the biggest social gamings I recall that kind of blew up in pandemic was Among Us. I know that blew up, right? Becomes very competitive too, right? Because now you have all these people that are kind of like accustomed to kind of playing a game that's really more accessible to play without paying much money up front. It kind of makes it hard for any new players to come in and I imagine just the cost of trying to acquire new players to a brand new game is just gonna be pretty huge, right? Like I don't play Fortnite, I don't play Roblox, and I'm still really amazed by how much staying power a game like Roblox, a game like Fortnite still has. Even Genshin Impact, right? I know Genshin Impact, and then visually I can see a allure of Genshin Impact, for example, and Minecraft. And it still amazes me how those games are relatively the age that they are, but they're still immensely popular. A lot of the gaming industry has been kind of like propped up on these games, and I wouldn't be surprised if we looked at the hard numbers. Probably a big majority of the millions, the billions of dollars that the game industry makes is probably attributed to those games like Roblox, Fortnite, Minecraft, Genshin, Call of Duty Warzone, right? That game is still kicking for after so many years. It kind of sounds like a good thing for game industry as a whole, but then when you have the casual player base that are playing those games just no longer being really interested in gaming anymore or being as engaged anymore, and they turn off and they look at other things that capture attention, then yeah, you can imagine that the gaming industry as a whole just suffers for it.
They just need to let AAA die and kind of just reset. Because like if I think from like Blizzard perspective, like I think they're kind of using like what would I say, like brand loyalty. It's kind of like the old Blizzard games that were really good that we all enjoyed. They're kind of using that to prop up all these new games. Like I just checked Diablo 4. It said they credited over 9,000 employees in developing the game. I mean, that game was so trash. I think like, yeah, just the whole industry is bloated. All of these like big studios that once used to make great games, they're kind of hoping, okay, this is Blizzard. They're going to have another banger this year. Like, Ubisoft. I mean, I used to play the like Assassin's Creed. It was like the American one. I mean, like those studios like Bungie, like they used to make great games, and now maybe with COVID and how much how much money gaming's making right now. So I think it's just everything's bloated, and they're just like firing off all these projects that are and chasing trends. Because I really think every like company's trying to like make their own Fortnite, like their own little universe, and like making like a forever game. But yeah, I can't imagine anyone doing what Fortnite does or like Roblox. Like, so yeah, so kind of let AAA burn. They just got to figure it out. I mean, there was like that study. I don't know if it was just like Steam only, but they're saying like more people were playing games that were like 5 years or older than recent games. So I can't like. Can you guys think of the last AAA? I guess Final Fantasy, but I mean, I guess for the development costs and stuff, they weren't like, because like FF16 wasn't that like really expensive to make?
I recall an article they said they didn't give specifics, but I think they said they didn't meet expectations. And so that's another thing too. I mean, yeah, definitely with games that aren't great, they're not going to sell. They end up kind of crashing and burning. They're huge sunk costs for these studios. But you also have certain games out there that are, by all accounts, good games, but they're also just not selling, right? Like, I mean, I talk a lot of shit about Final Fantasy and all that, not wanting to play those, but I can understand and respect, like, it is technically a good game. It appeals to a lot of people, but it's not making those sales. And also on that note, we have folks like over at Ubisoft give them a lot of crap too, but by all accounts, their Prince of Persia sort of reboot was an excellent game, and it didn't sell well. So then it's like, well, what do these studios do then, right? Because I mean, if they are able to produce a good product but it's not selling well, then what can you do?
No, I mean, it's another thing that's I was going through in the Matthew Ball's presentation. He actually does kind of break down the industry by platform, right? So like VR, console, PC, mobile, handheld, and even arcade. And as you can, not unsurprisingly, the biggest platform happens to be, as you can imagine, mobile, right? So it's like in 2024, right? Mobile was made up, almost 55% of the whole game industry market, $83 billion, right? And then console games are 18 billion. So, it's kind of like what you were saying, right? Raymond, like how AAA games are kind of chasing games, chasing trends, making games for a certain kind of audience, and the development costs are just so huge, like you were saying, Andrew. And yet, when you look at the numbers, there are much more players on mobile versus console, or even PC combined, right? So you put console and PC together, that's only like under $50 billion um, uh, for the industry. So you have all these, AAA developers and publishers building games and tossing like huge amounts of money, into a platform that, whether that's PC or a console, and the amount of potential players is not there. I mean, either they would have to price the game higher, which would make it more expensive to kind of make up for the amount of people to the lack of people that are buying it, or maybe not lack of people, but just not enough people buying it, right? So they have to increase the price to make up the cost, or they keep the price low at like $60, and hopefully that people will play. But realistically, that's not the case, right? Because according to all the data here, it says that mobile is where majority of the players are at and are spending money. All right, so if AAA developers and publishers are making games that are very expensive to make, it's just the numbers aren't just gonna work out, right? I mean, because there's only so high you can increase the price of a game before people just like say that's not worth it or get turned off. And we see it. We already see it happening, right? I mean, it's maybe a couple years ago. You can buy a PS5 game at like $60, $59.99 kind of thing. And now you're having all these packages of like for day one editions or like limited editions, and they price it like $10, $20 above the standard base price of 60. And you have these incredibly way out there prices just for a game and some added features like $100. I think what was that? Is that like I think that's upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows is being priced like that for like the very special like edition, something like that, for like $100. I think something like that. So I think it's pretty interesting for a lot of these companies or the leadership of those companies, management companies, expecting to make these games and expect that they will be able to recoup the cost, given the relatively smaller market that traditionally, PC and console games were, the mainstream for, right? So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to kind of see how that plays out. It actually kind of does make me think what's going to happen eventually. Well, maybe not eventually. It's already happening, right? We see it in, like, for example, Marvel Rivals recently, NetEase Games. I've never heard of NetEase Games before, and when I looked into them, they're based in China, right? And you can imagine China is probably the cost of paying for a developer, or any other person that's making a game. The cost, I imagine, be much more cheaper than what it costs to make a game, hire a person in the US, right? So, I mean, I'm not surprised, that even though it sucks, I'm not surprised that a lot of companies we're seeing in the headlines, dropping developers, whether it be here in the US or overseas in like our Western counterparts in Europe, dropping developers too, because it just, I'm sure, compared to some other countries, China, for example, it probably does cost quite a lot more to pay for those developers in their region versus outsourcing it to a place like China. That's it. I don't know what that would mean for development. Hard to say if it's a good thing or bad thing, though.
I heard in Rivals you can't type anything Taiwan. I think if you say like, I think I saw a video of someone trying to put like Taiwan as a country, and then it says, "This is not hate speech, but something offensive." And yeah, you can't type it in chat. Like Diablo 4, like even if the game wasn't like, let's say even if the game was good, it's already $70 for the game. I think 40 for the expansion. Then you have Battle Pass. Then you have microtransactions. Like, or you can just pick up Path of Exile 2. It's free to play, right? No barrier to entry. And then if you want to spend money, how microtransactions. So I think, I think if free to play games can get their formula right in in the future, it's just I can't imagine like for the same two games asking someone to pay just the game and all the other like battle pass and expansions.
Definitely is getting more pricey to play games. I mean, like, you can make the argument back then that playing games weren't that costly. I mean, yeah, there was upfront costs. I remember back in like the 90s, you could pick a game for $20, $40, $50. There was a point where it wasn't $60, it was $50, right? At one point. And that was it, right? You just pay the upfront cost and you would get like a huge value, right? You could play a game, especially if it was like RPG sort of based game, right? You could play like easily 40, 50, 100 hours, right? On that one game for that, one-time upfront cost. But now, it's just amazing how much people are paying for these games that are free upfront, but people are dishing out things for a battle pass, $10, $15 for a battle pass for a season, or $5, $20, $5, $10, $20 for a cosmetic skin. Like, it's pretty amazing, right? How people are playing to that, which also is actually interesting too, because as much as you know that, the Matthew Ball is making the case that that's actually has caused a double-edged sword for the industry, right? Because you have rise of mobile games, a lot of battle royales, free to play, battle passes, and people were playing that a lot, right? Like barrier to entry just to play the game was just like so easy to get into. Now you have people falling off that train or being to follow that train. And so now that main source of revenue is just like slowly being depleted, right? I mean, less players are playing. I mean, heck, I remember Apex Legends being a huge battle royale game, which I personally liked a lot. Like, I mean, I've been playing for so long that I kind of need to change. So I haven't played it in maybe the past year or so, but I remember really liking the game a lot, and I was putting money into that game myself too. And then just recently, after not playing for so long, I saw like a trailer, a preview, literally telling players come back and see what's new. Right? They're really trying to kind of bring in people, but a lot of companies are trying to funneling all that effort and hoping that money would come through those platforms, and people are not playing, so the money is not coming in to support their businesses and their companies. But I also think it's also interesting how paying to play a game has become quite expensive for the consumer. That basic economics, right? People are always going to look for a cheaper alternative, right? And I think that cheaper alternative essentially is social media in general. I mean, like, you can go on TikTok and just like your attention can just get sucked into that app for hours. Personally, I don't watch Twitch streamers or any other streamers play games, but I'm amazed how popular it's been to watch someone else play, not necessarily play the game yourself, but actually watch other plays. And I guess that just speaks to the whole changing dynamics, because if people are not really playing a game, but they're watching other people play the games, well, then that becomes a problem for the gaming industry as a whole. So I guess it's kind of like saying social media platforms are kind of eating into video games business.
So does that study, does it go into like the hardware side of gaming?
Yeah. He does go into the hardware side of games, and I think a lot of it has to be the install base is just not there compared to before, right? A lot of it's because of mobile, right? Mobile came in and it's just so easily accessible to play, and consoles, although they're quite fine hardware devices, right? And there's no denying that the games that are made on console are pretty outstanding. Last of Us, for example, Uncharted, God of War, Halo, etc. It's just that the player base has been it's just not there compared to mobile, right? And not only that, when these initial consoles came out, like this latest generation, PS5, for example, and the Xbox, the latest iteration, there was like this whole supply shortage that just made it harder for people to get their hands on. Right? I remember you and I, when we were getting the PS5, like I wouldn't have gotten PS5 if you weren't on the website on both, was it your computer and your cell phone, I think, something like that. And then
That and I was following like 10 accounts on Twitter.
right. So I mean, it was just so hard to get there. Like you have to put so much effort just to get it, right? So I mean, you can't blame, you know, a lot of gamers who wanted to get a console just couldn't get it. So that player base started off relatively small. It was just limited by the supply chain, and that you can imagine. Right, I can imagine that just kind of makes it harder for the console industry as a whole, because if you have a huge player base that can get their hands on a console on day one or the first initial weeks, months of launch, that would just kind of make growth even bigger down the line, right? But if you start off with a slower install base of consoles in the beginning, then you're just going to have a slower growth over time. And that's the case he makes, right? It's just that the console launches didn't launch the way it could have been, and therefore, overall, the install base for console games is just not there. And a lot of game companies, publishers, developers are finally waking up to that, I suppose, because you're seeing a lot of games that are slowly being ported over to PC. Whether the ports are good or not is a different story, but there's an attempt to bring their games over to PC. I know Sony's making an effort, right? God of War, Final Fantasy's coming on. I think Spider-Man's on PC now, right? I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. There's a lot more other games, and Xbox. I mean, they have their whole Game Pass, and they're putting their huge, heavy hitter games, Call of Duty, for example, Halo on Game Pass on day one, Indiana Jones on day one on Game Pass. Like, they see now that they cannot solely rely on consoles anymore, even PCs. They still make up a small segment of the video gamer consumer base. So, I mean, it's an interesting problem to have for industry. I think that the fact that, developers and publishers and companies are recognizing that they do need to diversify and put the games on different platforms is a good thing to do. But my worry, and it's kind of like what you said earlier, Raymond, right? How we have to let AAA games die. I think if the emphasis does become that we have to make games, or people start making games more for mobile, or they try to break into that market to get people's attention away from the established games that are on mobile, I'd be kind of sad about what that turns out, because a lot of the games that are on mobile are games personally I don't want to play. Like a lot of these gacha games, they're not my type of games. When I play a game on a console or PC, usually I kind of expect like a certain kind of like a scale or theme or quality, right, that you find on like a PC game or a console game. But mobile, I can't say. It's kind of like how I feel about handhelds in general, right? Like for the Nintendo Switch, I know they're good games, but I prefer not to play them on that size. So I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on how I kind of see if this whole attempt to diversify and broaden their reach, they start really honing in on that mobile market. But then again, maybe it might be futile. Well, maybe that futile is the wrong word. Maybe not futile, but maybe it won't be as easy as as saying, oh, because the mobile market is like the hugest market, that it's going to be better. Because like I mentioned earlier, this presentation is saying that a lot of the players that kind of mass herd came in during pandemic time are just not there anymore. I don't know what you guys think about like social media in particular. Social media has really ate into the business of video games. It's kind of like an attention war, right? Where you have these social media platforms just taking the attention away from video games, which I kind of think is a bad thing.
Also, he's saying it's a negative.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like a negative, like, because I guess the whole idea is that it's time, right? So, and people are beginning, or not beginning, but have transitioned away from video games and more towards social media. And that's eating away at the video game industry. I mean, which makes sense.
That's what I thought about Twitch, like mid 2010s. Like, I thought studios are making games to see which, like, if it will pop off on Twitch.
Yeah.
That was my conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Like, even if the game was mediocre, if it, like, to me, Among Us, like, I have no interest in it, but that thing was so huge. So, like, if you're successful on Twitch, your game will do well.
I mean, it's still kind of the case. Like, even whether it's Twitch or on shorts and stuff too. I lose hours at a time scrolling through like short form content, and even then I kind of like see different waves and trends of games of like, this is what we're kind of all following right now. And so the big one being Among Us, and everyone was streaming it at that time and making short form content. But since then we've seen like different copycats to that, or copycats to like Phasmophobia, and I've seen like their sales spike up because of the popularity there. And eventually like it dies down. But I'm curious to know the numbers of, if with these spikes, if it was enough for these various companies to gain enough capital to then move on to their next thing. But I do feel like that is somewhat of a tactic now to try to appeal to that, and make something that, even if it's not like super fine tuned, it does well enough, or it has enough of a hook to catch attention on Twitch or TikTok or whatnot.
They say that building the product or any product, whether it's software or like an actual physical product, for example, building that product is a lot easier than trying to acquire the customers, right? It's actually much more expensive to acquire the customers. The amount of money it takes to acquire, huge. Monopoly Go, I've never played it. I've heard of it, never played it. And the 11 months that the game came out, it made $2 billion in revenue. Okay. So that's pretty, I know, right? It's pretty amazing. Like how the game that's Monopoly Go make $2 billion, all right, in 11 months. But other games that you would think the deserve recognition and the financial reward just don't do too well, right? But the $2 billion revenue for the first 11 months of launch. Of that, it paid, fees to Apple, and then it had to pay money for user acquisition costs, and then licensing fees, and then the development costs. And then of that $2 billion, it only made, 0.5 billion. So only like a quarter. I think that's pretty amazing. But it also gets back to the whole theme of, it's just expensive to successfully make a game. Like, it's not only building it, you also have to pay all the upfront costs, all the costs just to make it successful, which is pretty huge. And then not only that, a lot of investment in games have just been declining. So, we see like news about games shutting down the development midway just because they don't have money. A lot of it's because, investment into video games are just not as plentiful as it was before. The game industry as a whole seems to be at a weak point. But, like you said, Raymond, I think a lot of it has to go down to the fact that I have to somehow make development of these games cheaper in some way. But not only just development of the games cheaper, but also being able to, put the game out there, the cost of putting the game out there to be cheaper. It's going to be a difficult time for the video game industry. Ubisoft has had like an 80% decline in their stock price. Unity, 84% decline in their stock price. Square Enix had a negative 35% decrease in their stock price from 2021 to now. And in comparison, you have like the S&P 500, stock index price, right? That's 57% increase from 2021 to 2025. So if you're an investor into these gaming companies, you're probably not too happy right now, that's for sure. And, can't blame the stock price for going the way it is, because a lot of things are kind of stacked against the video game industry right now. It's just harder to get money into making a game. It's hard to make a game. It's expensive to make a game. You have to fight against social media content in terms of getting players to pay attention to your game. We hear about games like indie games, doing really well, but I imagine then for every like one hugely successful game, hundreds more that are having a hard time getting past that hurdle.
Well, does he talk about GTA 6? Like, are they gonna do the $80, whatever it was?
I think if Rockstar priced it at whatever price they want to price it at, that's still considered reasonable, or maybe just a little bit above reasonable. I suspect, given the name of that game and the hype around it, and even like the perceived quality of the game, that people would spend it, assuming that the game is still good. Like when the game launches and reviews come out, if the reviews are still high on it, I think it will still sell like hotcakes. For Rockstar, I think for Rockstar they'll be okay, right? Because they're reaping the benefits. But as would that help the industry as a whole?
But wouldn't it be smarter to just price it at 70 and do like a 5-day early access for like 100?
There are definitely people that would pay that. I don't think it would be as huge, but I definitely think people would pay that.
It's like taking drugs. Like, you don't want to tell your friends you paid the $100 early access.
But at the same time, I mean, there's actually like huge incentive to do that, right? Especially in the age of like content creators, right? To get that early access so that then you can produce content, get views, and then that'll just make up for that cost.
The quote unquote whales that pay those huge amounts, they do make up quite a bit of the revenue that a game makes. So the overall market for the consoles is still relatively small in comparison to the overall game industry. And I imagine GTA 6 is not cheap to make. It definitely does not look like a cheap game to make. Like it took how long to make that game? And it's expected to come out to fall 2025 if there are no further delays. And the quality of the game, and I'm sure the talent on the game is not cheap. Maybe for marketing, they don't need to market the game that much, because just the name GTA, right, is really such an iconic name, and people will just know it, either because they know it by past games experience or just by word of mouth. That maybe they don't have to pay so much money for user acquisition. I imagine they could not realistically price the game at $6 and expect to make up their game. I would imagine it would be a premium game, maybe 70, maybe 80, and maybe $100 is not unreasonable for a game of that scale.
They've also been milking the success from GTA 5. Like, I just did a quick Google search, and as of November 2024, they have earned about 8.6 billion in revenue and have sold over 200 million copies for that. So I think, whether or not GTA 6 does turn out to be a success, which I do imagine by most industry standards, it will be considered a success. Now, whether or not it will reach the same caliber as GTA 5, we'll see. But I think they'll be fine, even if worse comes worse and this becomes like a loss for them.
It just takes a lot of time to make the money, right? Maybe there's some kind of new monetary strategy that they'll implement. You pay the upfront cost for the game, but they include some kind of strategy to make additional revenue throughout the life of the game. And like you said, they definitely milked GTA 5, especially the different versions of releases, PS4 and then PS5. Maybe it's not a makeup of cost in the initial first year of launch. Maybe it's a makeup of cost over a longer period of time, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out.
I hope they price it at 80. But I think the price hike is going to be GTA specific, and like some dummy like EA, they're going to be like, okay, we can launch our next IP for 80. And then no one's going to buy them, and they're going to tank.
Yeah, GTA 6 Rockstar is like that signal that it could be okay to price that price. But if the games aren't good, or if there are maybe too many choices. I mean, because there are a lot of choices in games these days. I agree. Like, there's a lot of games I want to play, but it's just so hard to follow. And it's not only just time too. I mean, lack of time compared to when we were younger is a factor too. But it's not only just time. I would argue there is quite a lot of things to play. Like, you have games that come out on the big players, right? They make quite a lot of games, but you also have a lot of indie games too that are coming out that are quite good too. And it really is hard to provide attention. Even if I want to be supportive, give my attention, pay the money, $5, $10. Heck, there are even a couple games that are like $3 or less that are quite good. I want to be supportive to those developers and reward them for their hard work. There's just so many things to play that it's really hard to do, even if I have the heart to do so.
That's true. I bought Balatro and then never played it yet. I think it's going to be like a PC plus handheld kind of. It's like PS6 and what, Xbox XX or whatever the next one is. I mean, how much closer are they going to be like just a PC?
Well, I mean, I guess you kind of see that, right? I mean, you got the whole PlayStation Portal. I mean, I was kind of surprised how well PlayStation Portal sold and how much attention it got. I mean, the build quality of the PlayStation Portal was pretty good. I mean, I remember holding it for a little bit. And I was like, oh yeah, this feels pretty sturdy. I can't say about the connection. It's a bit hard to connect, but
that's like the only good thing about Xbox. Like their cloud gaming is really good. PS5, I need like the perfect connection for PS Portal to not like lag.
When I talk to a casual gamer, I do feel like there's a bit of like a disconnect between me and them, because I'm thinking, I kind of don't see the appeal of the casual games like Monopoly Go. Like I could not play the game. I would never play the game. Alright everyone, so there's no doubt that the game industry is in a state of decline. Layoffs, game cancellations, studio closures. But with that said, there are still many things to look forward to, like the Nintendo Switch 2. And you can hear a case as to why it won't be an easy win for Nintendo and why they should be worried about the upcoming handheld console war and the number of competitors it now faces by clicking this video.